It all started with something so subtle that we dismissed it as a normal part of aging. At first, my grandmother just seemed to lose a few pounds. Nothing alarming, nothing out of the ordinary. But over time, her body began to waste away in front of our eyes, and it felt like watching sand slip through fingers no matter how tightly we tried to hold on. Her once vibrant frame turned skeletal. Her clothes hung off her like they belonged to someone twice her size. Her face became gaunt, her cheekbones jutting out sharply against pale skin, making her look like a shadow of the woman I'd known my entire life. Then one morning, everything changed forever. I remember rushing into her room after hearing my mother scream. There she was, motionless on the bed, her breathing shallow and labored, her hands icy cold. Panic surged through us as we called an ambulance, praying for some miracle to explain what was happening. The doctor's words hit us like a freight train. Her body is shutting down. There's nothing we can do. We refused to accept this verdict. Desperation took over, and every meal became a battleground. We cooked her favorite dishes, forcing smiles while begging her to eat even a single bite. She would push the plate away weakly, her eyes filled with both guilt and exhaustion. One evening, during what should have been a simple family dinner, she collapsed mid-step while trying to leave the table. Her frail body crumpled to the floor, leaving us paralyzed with fear. That moment shattered any illusion we had about her condition being temporary or reversible. It wasn't just weight loss anymore. It was a countdown clock ticking louder with each passing day. As the weight continued to slip away from her body, something even more devastating began to take hold: extreme fatigue and weakness. It was as if every ounce of energy she once possessed had been drained from her, leaving behind a shell that could barely function. At first, we thought it was just part of her grieving process over losing so much weight. But soon it became clear this wasn't sadness. It was surrender. My grandmother stopped leaving her bed altogether. She no longer sat in her favorite armchair by the window or joined us for meals at the table. Even sitting up required monumental effort, and one night everything reached a breaking point. I remember waking up to the sound of my mother screaming. We rushed into Grandma's room, hearts pounding, only to find her lying motionless on the bed, eyes closed, skin pale and clammy. For a moment, time froze. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Was she gone? Had we lost her without even realizing it? Tears streamed down our faces as we stood there, paralyzed with fear. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, we saw her chest rise and fall, a shallow, uneven breath. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The reality hit hard. She was slipping away, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable heaviness. Every attempt to help her move felt like torture for both her and us. One afternoon, we tried to get her out of bed, thinking fresh air might lift her spirits. Just taking a single step left her gasping for air, sweat pouring down her face as though she'd run a marathon. Her legs trembled violently under her frail body, and when she finally collapsed back onto the mattress, tears welled up in her eyes, not from pain, but from frustration and despair. Watching someone who used to walk miles around the neighborhood now struggle to cross her own bedroom floor was gut-wrenching. Her withdrawal from life grew deeper with each passing day. Social interactions became impossible. Family gatherings, once loud and lively, fell silent because she simply didn't have the strength to participate. One evening, my youngest cousin, Lily, came running out of Grandma's room sobbing uncontrollably. She won't talk to me, Lily cried, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. When I went in to check, I found Grandma staring blankly at the ceiling, her gaze empty and distant. When Lily approached her, all Grandma could muster was a weak glance before turning away. It broke my heart to see the bond between them unraveling, not because of anger or neglect, but because her body was failing her mind. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was as if her spirit itself was fading. Conversations dwindled to monosyllabic responses, then silence. Meals turned into rituals where we spoon-fed her tiny bites, hoping against hope that nourishment would somehow reignite her vitality. But it never did. Instead, she slept more and more, retreating further into herself. Each nap seemed longer than the last until entire days blurred together in a haze of stillness. Looking back, I realize how powerless we truly were. No amount of coaxing, pleading, or loving care could reverse what was happening. Her body had made its decision, and ours was to accept it or not. That realization forced us to confront our worst fears, saying goodbye. Yet, amidst the anguish, we also learned to cherish the small moments. A faint smile, a squeeze of the hand, the sound of her breathing, even these fleeting gestures carried profound meaning. They reminded us that love transcends words and actions, existing even in the quietest spaces. As the weight loss and fatigue continued to take their toll, a new and devastating change began to emerge: cognitive decline. At first, it was subtle. My grandmother would forget where she had placed her glasses or mix up the names of her grandchildren. We dismissed it as a normal part of aging, but soon the signs became impossible to ignore. One evening, she called me by my father's name, not once, but 3 times in a row. It felt like a punch to the gut, but we told ourselves it was just an isolated incident. Then came the night that shattered any illusion of normalcy. It was past midnight when I heard her screaming from her room. By the time we rushed in, she was cowering in the corner, her face pale with terror. "Who are you?" she shouted at us, her voice trembling. The room was pitch black, and in her mind, shadows had transformed into strangers threatening to harm her. She lashed out wildly, knocking over a lamp before collapsing onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. When the lights came on, her eyes darted around the room, searching for answers she couldn't find. "They were here," she whispered hoarsely, pointing toward the empty doorway. That moment left us shaken, not because of what had happened, but because we realized how fragile her connection to reality had become. But the worst was yet to come. A few weeks later, in the dead of night, we discovered her gone. Her bed was empty, the front door wide open, and panic surged through every fiber of our being. We scoured the neighborhood, calling her name, praying she hadn't wandered too far. Finally, we found her 2 blocks away, barefoot and shivering in her nightgown, standing under a flickering street lamp. She looked utterly lost, staring blankly at passing cars as if they weren't even there. When my uncle approached her, she flinched, mistaking him for someone else. "Where am I?" she asked weakly, her voice barely audible. Bringing her home felt like dragging a piece of ourselves back from the edge of despair. The emotional toll of watching her slip further away was unbearable. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now ended in silence. There were moments when she'd sit quietly for hours, gazing out the window as though waiting for something or someone that never arrived. One day, my older brother, who had always been the rock of our family, broke down in tears after visiting her. She stared at him blankly, then asked, "Who are you?" His name caught in his throat as he tried to answer, but no words came out. Instead, he simply held her hand, tears streaming down his face. Those long silences between them spoke volumes, and yums. They were echoes of a bond, slowly unraveling not by choice but by forces beyond anyone's control. Her withdrawal wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological. Hobbies she once loved, knitting, gardening, telling stories about her childhood, now seemed foreign to her. She stopped recognizing my grandfather, the man she'd spent decades loving and building a life with. He sat beside her one afternoon, holding her hand, and said softly, "It's me, darling. It's your husband." She blinked at him, confused, then turned away. The pain in his eyes was palpable. It was as if he was losing her twice, first to illness and second to memory. Watching her drift away was like witnessing a slow-motion shipwreck. Each forgotten name, each unrecognizable face, chipped away at the foundation of everything we held dear. Yet amidst the chaos, we clung to the fleeting moments of clarity, a smile, a faint spark of recognition, and cherished them more deeply than ever before. Because even as she faded, her presence remained etched in our hearts, reminding us that love transcends memory and time. As the cognitive decline deepened and fatigue consumed her, another cruel twist of fate began to unfold. Her body's inability to heal. It started with something so seemingly insignificant that we dismissed it entirely, a small sore on her ankle. At first, it was just a tiny red mark, barely noticeable against her pale skin. But weeks turned into months, and instead of healing, the sore grew larger, darker, and more ominous. The once minor wound became an open ulcer, oozing and raw, spreading like a shadow across her leg. We rushed her to the hospital when it became infected, hoping for antibiotics or some miracle treatment to save her. But the doctors shook their heads gravely. "Her body can no longer recover," they said, their voices heavy with finality. The infection spread mercilessly, defying every attempt at control. One afternoon, as I sat by her bedside reading aloud from one of her favorite books, a futile effort to bring back even a flicker of recognition, she suddenly shivered violently. Her forehead burned with fever, and within minutes, she slipped into delirium, muttering incoherently about people and places none of us recognized. Panic surged through the household as we called an ambulance yet again. Watching her frail body convulse with fever was like witnessing a storm tear apart a fragile ship. There was nothing we could do but hold on and pray. At the hospital, they pumped her full of medications, but the treatments felt futile. Each day she returned weaker than before, her skin turning grayish, her breathing shallow and labored. The fight to keep her alive seemed less like medicine and more like torture. That's when the arguments began. My uncle insisted on pursuing every possible medical intervention, no matter the cost or pain involved. "We have to try everything," he shouted during one heated family meeting, slamming his fist on the table. "She's our mother. How can we just give up?" But my father, usually calm and reserved, countered fiercely. "And what are we fighting for? To prolong her suffering? Look at her. She's not living anymore. She's barely surviving. Is this really what she would want?" His voice cracked under the weight of his emotions. For the first time, I saw tears streaming down his face. The room fell silent except for the sound of muffled sobs. Even Lily, who had clung so desperately to hope, looked away, unable to argue further. In the end, after days of agonizing debate, We made the heart-wrenching decision to stop aggressive treatment. It wasn't surrender, it was love. We brought her home, surrounding her with warmth and care rather than needles and machines. Every moment became precious, every touch a reminder of how much she meant to us. Though her body continued to fail, her presence remained a beacon of all she had given us over the years. And though the road ahead was unbearably painful, we chose to walk it together, holding on to each other and the memories she had created. As the infections and physical decline continued to wear her down, the final chapter of her life began to unfold in ways that were both haunting and heart-wrenching. It started one night when the sound of labored breathing filled the room, loud, raspy, and uneven. The once peaceful silence of the house was shattered by the relentless wheezing that seemed to echo off the walls. Each breath felt like a battle, each pause between inhales stretching longer than the last. We sat there, frozen in fear, counting seconds that felt like hours. Was she still breathing? Or had she finally slipped away? Every moment of silence was unbearable, a cruel reminder of how fragile life had become. The coldness in her hands and feet grew more pronounced with each passing day, no matter how many blankets we piled on her frail body. One evening, Lily, the youngest and most sensitive among us, reached out to hold her grandmother's hand, but instead of warmth, she recoiled with a shriek. "She's freezing," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Her tiny voice trembled as she whispered, "It's like touching ice." That moment sent a shiver through all of us. It wasn't just the physical chill, it was the realization that death was closing in, creeping closer with every shallow breath. In those final hours, the atmosphere was suffocating. The room felt heavy with unspoken grief, the air thick with anticipation of what was to come. She tried to speak several times, her lips moving faintly as if desperate to convey one last message. But no words came out, only faint gasps for air. Her eyes, wide and glistening with tears, locked onto ours as if pleading for understanding or forgiveness. It was as though her mind was racing with thoughts she could no longer express, trapped in a body that could no longer obey. Watching her struggle to communicate was excruciating. It felt like being suspended in limbo, caught between hope and despair. We gathered around her bed, holding hands tightly, forming a circle of love and protection. My father led a silent prayer, his voice breaking under the weight of emotion. Even my uncle, who had always been stoic and pragmatic, buried his face in his palms, overcome by sorrow. Lily clung to her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, while my older brother sat motionless, staring at our grandmother with an expression of profound helplessness. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. Every now and then, her chest would rise sharply, startling us, only to fall again into another agonizing pause. Each time we braced ourselves for the worst, yet somehow she lingered. It was as if her body refused to let go entirely, clinging to the edges of life with stubborn resilience. But we knew it was only a matter of time. Her skin had taken on a ghostly pallor, almost translucent, and her extremities were icy to the touch despite the layers of warmth we tried to provide. By dawn, the room was eerily quiet. The once loud wheezing had softened to barely audible whispers of breath. We held our collective breaths, waiting, praying for peace, for her sake and ours. When the final exhale came, it was so gentle that we almost missed it. In that instant, the world seemed to stop spinning. Tears flowed freely, but there was also a strange sense of relief. She was free now, released from the pain and exhaustion that had consumed her for so long. And though her absence left a void none of us could ever fill, we found solace in knowing we had been there for her until the very end. After months of watching her body betray her, losing weight, struggling to breathe, and forgetting the faces of those she loved most, we finally understood that fighting nature was futile. The night her breathing slowed to a whisper, we gathered around her bed, hearts heavy but united. Tears still fell, but they were no longer of despair. They carried gratitude for every moment we'd shared. Lily clutched her grandmother's hand, whispering, "I love you," while my father sang an old hymn that had been her favorite. Each word felt like a thread stitching us closer to her, even as she drifted further away. When her final breath left her, the room grew silent, yet it wasn't emptiness. It was peace. We had walked with her until the very end, holding her through pain, confusion, and fear. And though her absence would leave a void, our hearts found solace in knowing she hadn't faced it alone. As life slips away, it waits for no one, the narrator emphasized, his voice trembling with urgency. Don't let these signs pass unnoticed. Cherish your loved ones before it's too late. He shared a haunting story of a man who ignored his mother's gradual decline, dismissing her fatigue and confusion as mere aging. When she passed, regret consumed him. Sleepless nights, tears streaming down his face, and an unshakable guilt that haunted him for years. Learn from my mistake, he pleaded. Love deeply while you still can.